everyone. Welcome to The Presumption. I'm Sara Azari here with my esteemed colleague, Jim Griffin. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Sara. Sorry about that. How are you?
No worries. How are you?
I'm good.
Matt Fondelier, our wonderful producer. Hi, Matt.
Hey, guys.
So today is so special for us. We have been wanting to speak to Chris Cuomo for a long time. He's been a dear friend of mine for probably around 17 years. He always says not to say how long because it makes us look old. But he's been a dear friend. He's been really good to us here on the podcast. He's always promoting and, when Jim goes on a show, he's just super fair, leads the interview with integrity. And so there's no better person for us to sit down with than Chris because he, look, he's got politics in his DNA. He's a lawyer. He's a journalist, and he's covered crime for decades. I mean, this guy was at Fox, then ABC, then CNN, and now, of course, News Nation. And he's got personal experience with false accusations, and he's got experience as a journalist. And I think it also helps that he's a lawyer. So just so well-rounded for what we do here. And so we're really honored to have him. And so here's us with Chris Cuomo. All right. And we are here with the man, the Mo man, Chris Cuomo, my dear friend. Welcome to The Presumption, Chris.
Wow. What an opportunity this is for me.
Pulling my leg.
Helping me on
We've just chased you since we launched in June. But look, Chris doesn't need an intro, although we did an intro. It's just such an honor to have you with us. You're the perfect person to talk to us about all the things that we're about on this podcast. When Jim and I started this, we were not going to be the popular podcast or the popular kids because we're not. We're just the unpopular view. But it was important for us to sort of highlight this missing voice of the presumption of innocence and the way that media covers crime, and they cover a lot of crime now. You do as well, and also the lost illness, the substance abuse and mental illness in the criminal justice system. So it's really kind of you to support us and give us all the plugs over the last, several months. And we appreciate that. So you believe in the presumption, right?
It doesn't matter if I do or not. It's a fundamental aspect of the justice system.
Okay. Well, let's play a clip from when I was on Chris's show with Mark Garagos.
See what happens.
Yeah, The Presumption of Innocence, I think it's called. I think there's a great podcast by that name also.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You're supposed.
Yes, The Presumption of Innocence, but then we ended up, every so often when we chat by text, exchanging some text messages that I then shared with Jim. And I wasn't really, I don't know, they were concerning. Matt, can you put up the text messages? So this is about Corey Richens, and that's your picture with Mario up there. That's about Corey Richens in Utah, the woman who is accused of poisoning her husband with fentanyl. She is yet to stand trial. And you're like, she did it. She did it. So I don't know. I mean, the presumption of innocence.
She did it.
Oh, Chris. I mean, she's what? Okay, look, the evidence there is there's other text messages that I will give you because they're about Peterson, but
no,
this
you're
one.
Fine. First of all, how dare you violate my privacy in a text message by sharing? But I assume that you would do that.
I edited it. It was the villain edit. Villain edit.
I will return this by forwarding some pictures you sent me. And there are two things. One is the standard of proof and how we conduct ourselves within the criminal justice system. That is one thing. There is then the court of public opinion, and they are different for a reason, and each matters. Now, the conflation of them is dangerous. I do not believe what a lot of you people like to argue, which is, oh, there shouldn't be any public discussion of a case. You need public discussion of a case for three reasons. One, because this is the people's business being done, and they should weigh in on it. Two, it often motivates investigation and to allow the authority to know that this matters and they better be supposed to do. And 3 is that very often the system gets it wrong. And it is important to have people weighing in on the value of the policies that underlie some of these cases. So it can be like, well, we shouldn't, and because defense attorneys only feel this way when it's their client in the game. When it's not their client in the game, you guys are more than happy to yap about whatever it is. But when it's your client, whoa, we shouldn't try the case before it actually happens. So I like to police that game a little bit, but I do think there's space for both. You have to respect.
No, but look, Chris, I mean, I understand. I mean, there's value to media coverage of these cases as well, because look at, for example, Adnan Syed. That podcast Serial was the reason why his conviction was overturned. I mean, that's what shed light on all the issues in his trial. And I know that, there are pros to this as well, but I guess from the perspective of a journalist, you're a truth finder, you're a lie catcher, you're the best at it, and you get to the bottom of it. And so there's this fascination with crime that Jim and I appreciate. I think that it's impressive how people know so much about what we do. There's cameras in the courtroom, they know the procedure. I mean, it's pretty impressive. But what I don't like is sometimes the chyrons they're not reconcilable with the truth. And so, like, one example that comes to my mind that's recent is putting up Buster Murdaugh next to Stephen Smith. Oh my God, roadside accident that killed this kid. It was Buster. The whole family's criminal. It's like there was no evidence of that, and at the end of the day, it didn't turn out to be true. So, what's the ethics? I mean, how do you choose?
That's responsible. Look, I think it's a fairly bright line, to be honest. There's one thing where when I'm texting with you and you are playing on a very slim possibility, not a probability, that there's a different outcome other than the obvious one in a situation like where the guy's poisoned and the only person who was giving him anything was his wife, and the Buster Murdaugh situation where it's the opposite. Whereas there is no proof connecting the kid to the situation, but it just feels good because of the narrative about the family. I think it's a pretty bright line distinction. And I am very careful to not convict people on my show, even when I think that that's the way it is, because that's part of what I love about the coverage of crime is I love that you never know how it's going to come out. And it's always been this way, by the way. Crime is not a new area of fascination for the American audience. It's just found a new manifestation in a modality of social media and these TikTokers, these cyber sleuths, as they're. So it's always mattered. Why? Well, because it goes to the fundamental interest of news, which is people's sense of self-protection. People are very into what could endanger them. So crime's a natural.
Well, and Jim, we were on Good Morning America a few months back, and Jim took it back to Kill a Mockingbird and, the spectacle of a trial. I mean, it's always been there, but I think it's just exponential now because of social media. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim on Murdaugh, because, of course, Jim has a lot of questions on that case.
Hey, Chris, good talking with you.
Are you going to reveal some of our private conversations also?
No, I have no pictures of you. You have none of me, and we don't really have no real private conversations. But here's what I want to get your perspective as to why the Murdaugh case drew so much attention.
Oh, that's easy. So here's why. One, media is a pack animal, and they love to add to momentum as opposed to originating any initial force. I mean, we're actually living that right now with this missing South Florida woman in Spain. I got called about from a friend of hers, Ana Knežević. Knežević is her married name, Serbian name. I got called about that story by a friend of hers, and I did a little checking, and I said, "Oh yeah, this is weird." So I started covering it. Nobody picked up. Now, part of it is because I don't have that huge platform at CNN anymore, but it's also because the media likes to cover what the media covers. And now it's starting to gain momentum, not because the story changed, not because there's some new facts that change it. It's that it's a pack animal. So that's number one. Number two, Netflix did a series on it. Why did Netflix do a series on Murdaugh? People like to get into the space of wealth, privilege, and how it operates in society.
Mm-hmm.
And Murdaugh's checked those boxes. And then they had that extra. And the extra is there's a lot of weird shit that happens around the family. So it gave you like that dynasty vibe or whatever the modern day equivalent is of that. So that checks a lot of boxes. And it had the last one, which matters most to me in a story like this. What matters most to me in crime and covering it is the underlying policy involved. I'm not just an intrigue junkie, but the idea of, because where do you start with a homicide? The homicide analysis always begins. I mean, of course, you have means, motive, and opportunity, but it's, well, who else would do it? It's got to be someone who knew this person. Otherwise, there's this other randomized scenario of the monster, the unknown, and this Murdaugh story played to that. Why? Who kills their own kid, let alone the way that this happened? Killing the wife, okay, but killing your own kid, you don't really hear that. So it checked a lot of boxes, but don't sleep on that white, rich privilege thing, because, the media loves to beat up white, rich people, and people like to get insight into how power and privilege plays in society.
So just to follow up on that, as a lawyer trying a lot of cases, for years and years, we didn't have cameras in the courtroom. And then, we started experimenting with them. And now, the Murdaugh case, I mean, it was a daytime must watch TV. And I guess the question I have to you is, if cameras were not allowed in the courtroom at the Murdaugh trial, would it have garnered so much attention?
No, we need picture. It's a visual medium. I am a transparency junkie. I believe in transparency everywhere. I think it never hurts. For years, I struggled with this when it comes to cops and cams, because there are things that happen in policing, as you guys both know, that the uninitiated may not understand, and that people could demonize and weaponize for their own agenda. I understand that. I still transparency is key. I think every trial should be on. I think the way we protect minors is wrong. I think the way that we protect people who make allegations of a sexual variety is wrong. I think that there can be special cases, of course, but I think it's gone too far. I think the way we protect the audience from the dead is wrong. I think that when there's a mass shooting, you should see what happens to the bodies. I think you should see it at war. I think you should see the reality. Transparency is key.
One last question, Chris. I know you've covered the trial, covered the post-trial stuff, and Becky Hill et al. Here's the question: in your opinion, did Alec get a fair trial?
Did Alec get a fair trial? No. And I'll tell you why. I am also of the school of let them all go. Not sure about how we did it. Let them all go if we're not sure that it was fair. Let them all go. I believe in that. I believe in let the 100 guilty men go free so that one innocent man does not get wrongly convicted. I believe in that. And I don't understand how this judge came to this conclusion. I don't understand how the first person he interviews says, yeah, she talked to me, which automatically should be, this clerk has no business talking to jurors. But not only did she talk to me, but yes, it influenced my decision. I don't know how it's not over there. Do I understand the rest of his analysis and how they believe it wasn't that instructive and that maybe the person wasn't given the real answer the first time? Yes, yes, and yes. But I think you err on the side And I know it's expensive. And I know that this was complicated. But I was shocked that it didn't get more play. I think that goes to bias. I think it goes to bias in the media. People want Murdaugh to be guilty.
Well, and
So
I think that Murdaugh was such a, by the way, Jim, Chris is behind my fascination with the Murdaugh case. That's how it all started, is when you started covering the case on CNN and we were texting. I was like, what is this? This is crazy. This is a crazy story. But, you know, Chris, you know, I feel like that Murdaugh gave the judiciary such a big black stain or black eye in South Carolina that it was just, there's no way he's going to get any slack or any relief, even if the law's on his side. And I think that this is only going to, you know, hopefully get overturned in a different level, which what Jim and Dick Harpootlian are working on. But this is, I mean, I think it's no secret in our world that sometimes the result is determined and then we just work backwards to get there. So
I think he's got trouble on two levels. One, he's got the trouble of, well, he did something. So he probably killed his wife and his kid. And he probably had something to do with some of these other things that happened in and around his family. And then you have the other one, which is really wrong, which is, and the guy's a fucking junkie. So, you know, these junkies, you know, this is what they do. And that part bothers me the most and is one of the most shocking continued prejudices in our society. I don't know how in the year 2024, people can have the arrogance, the unmitigated gall to think that they are untouched by mental health illness, and that addiction is not mental illness, and that somehow people who are addicted are somehow bad, or that their illness should not have anything to do with how they behave. I think it is nuts, pun intended, that we are still in this place in 2024, and I think it's only out of convenience, and that's really sad.
You know,
I mean, that brings, you know, Judge Newman at Alex's sentencing says, well, maybe it wasn't you. Maybe it was the monster you become when you take these drugs. And this is a guy who's been on drugs for 20 years. I mean, so anyway, but
it's the same person.
Who doesn't know this? Who doesn't know? Like Sara, you know, look, Sara and I have a lot of shared history. And your audience should know. So I don't know Jim as well. I've had very good and straight dealing with him. I think he represents people for the right reasons. He's never asked anything to aggrandize himself, which is rare in TV attorneys. Sara, I know much, much better. She is a very important person in my life. And she suffers through me being a very lackluster friend. I am, you know, if bad shit happens, I'm a good guy to have in your life, but otherwise not so great. And she is one of the few people I know who, one, has actually done the real job and not for 5 minutes. Okay. Like that's what I am. Okay. I practiced law for 3.5, 4 years. Okay. I'm one of those. I'm a TV lawyer. Okay. I do not know practice the way she does. She would slice me like fatty cheese if we were ever child together. And she has tremendous interest and passion for the pursuit of what matters in a story, in a case, as much or more than anyone else I've ever worked with in the space. I got to let this stupid dog. If I weren't talking to Sara right now, I wouldn't be doing not just this podcast. I would not be letting this little bitch dog back in my house after she just shit on my carpet. But I'm going to break because Sara believes that everybody deserves forgiveness except me on occasion. So I think it's important that you as an audience understand this, that not all podcasters are the same, not all lawyers are the same, and a lot of them are fugazi. And you have two right now benefiting you in a way that they don't. Now, part of our shared experience is we understand a lot of people who've been through the hard way with illness. And look, in vino veritas, forgiving people when that night they were drunk, when they said what they said, forgiving people for breaking that thing in your house, the fear that we have when someone's going to drive and they're under the influence, how we are careful about how we deal with people when we know that they're under the influence of something. The metaphor that you hear that you're like, hey, you don't talk to someone when they're drowning, right? And we know all these things, right? But then when it comes into the most important context of understanding behavior, because remember what the law is. Two things: what they did, the actus reus, right? And what's the more important part? Mens rea. Could they form the intent? We know. But as a society, starting in the 1940s, we decided, you know what? There are too many drunks. We're not going to give them a break. Some kind of skewed Christian sense of morality that you must pay for your sins. And the law echoed it. And they started to move away from any sophistication of thought when it comes to assessing intent on the basis of diminished capacity. And they created higher and higher bars of entry. Now it's starting to change a little bit, but we're still in a place now where if somebody took too much Ambien, okay, because we all like Ambien. Ambien's not a bad thing. So I can't sleep. I took Ambien. I thought I took a half. Turns out I took a whole one. I ran right off the road and I banged into this other car on the way. Thank God the person's all right. But that's a situation where you're like, well, yeah, I get it. The medication, that can happen. But if I say the same thing and it's crack, now you're like, go to hell. You're going to jail for the rest of your life.
Well, Chris, and what's pathetic is in the system, I had a federal district judge who actually, I'm not calling him pathetic, just to be clear. I'm just saying that the idea is pathetic. He oversees the drug court in our district. And my client was a terrible gambling addict. He also had an opioid problem. And at sentencing, he said, I don't believe that he's an addict. I mean, the definition of addiction and substance abuse and just addiction, addiction can be food, sex, drugs, gambling, it could be anything, right? It's still in 2024 lost on the system. And, it's just that nexus between, like, for example, in Jim's case, I remember right after the verdict came and I was like, this is ridiculous. I mean, how could people be taking their calculator out, trying to do the math on how much money he stole versus how many pills he took? It's not about that. It's a lifestyle. You do all kinds of shady things. You lie, you cheat, you steal, and that connection is still not being, recognized. But
it's difference between explanation and excuse,
right.
And our desire to punish bad behavior.
Yeah, but I mean, it is a real thing, and we see it in most of our cases. One of the first things I do is delve into the person's history from their development as a kid to their adulthood, and there's always something there. I mean, there are people who, are perfect adults or close to perfect adults, came from perfect family structure, and might end up in a situation. But 90% of my clients, something went wrong somewhere, So
but even if it didn't, we know the stories all over the place. And again, if I were a diabetic or I had a heart issue and I went into some type of distress and I took too much nitroglycerin or whatever my medication was, and then I did something that transgressed the law, people would be understanding, but not addiction. Look, what do we say to addicts when we don't know what we're talking about and we have addicts in our lives? Why don't you just stop? Stop drinking. Stop fill in the blank of the addiction. Just stop. Get some discipline. Come on.
Wow.
You don't know what the hell. I would never say that if it were cancer. Nobody says that thing about having long COVID. You know what I mean? Hey, stop being so flushed. Stop with the brain fog.
That's just because you're white. You're white. You think you're
not
you're white.
Seven generations.
All right. So I want to get into your HLN series. Chris did a series on HLN, the sister network to CNN, when he was at CNN. He did several, but this one was called Inside Evil. And I absolutely loved each and every episode. For the true crime followers out there, for Chris's followers out there and ours, you absolutely should pull this up on demand and watch it. Chris would very nonchalantly drive up to the Supermax prisons in upstate New York and visit serial killers to try to get into their minds. Was it nature or nurture? What is in the psyche of a serial killer? And so in the context of, all the things that you cover, including Rex Heuermann and Gilgo Beach, I really sort of was one of the fascinating episodes for me was the Joel Rifkin interview that you did. Joel Rifkin had killed, I think, 17 women. Oh, hi, Eliza. Hi.
This is
Very cute.
not because she looks like Sarah.
So the Rifkin interview is fascinating to me. He killed 17 women, very similar to Rex Heuermann. He had raped them, dragged their bodies, dumped their bodies, etc., tortured them. But watching Chris do this interview, you kept pressing him about how he felt when there was a stench from a body in his car, or what was his reaction right after a killing, and he couldn't tell you. Like, that's what was so frightening. Tell me about tell me what was going through your mind when you were sitting there with him, and what do you think it is? Is it nature or nurture?
Look, it's got to be both. It has to be that there are some of them that are just evil people, but more. And by the way, we changed the name of the show because it's tough to book somebody, it turns out, when they know they're going to be called evil. But there's also a lot of illness. And sometimes people, again, they don't want to justify behavior that they reject. Pedophiles are sick people. It's very rare that you find somebody who actually enjoys, in a healthy way, sex with a minor. This is very unusual. It's an illness. Serial killers, often the same thing. Joel Rifkin was obviously a profoundly ill guy. And you know what? So are these women who fall in love with him all the time, which is crazy. And he was telling me about them when I was there. He also told me a story. Look, the answer to your question is, I'm fascinated by serial killers because they look like the rest of us. Mm-hmm. And we are interested in understanding what makes them different in such a profound way that we don't believe we could ever do. How is it that the rest of their life is totally like mine, except every few weeks they get this weird urge, or like this other cat that I interviewed who starts to smell oranges when somebody's pissing him off. And that's when he knows he has to kill them. So I stopped the interview and I asked him, "You're not smelling oranges now, are you?" He like kind of around and he was like, "No." I was like, "All right, good, let's continue." But with Joel Rifkin, he told me a story. Listen to this. He picks up, he said that he had never told this story before, but I think he did. Anyway, he picks up this sex worker, okay? And she's a little older. And they get in the car and they start fooling around or whatever they're doing. And he starts to choke her. And she is underneath him and he is choking her, trying to kill her. She gets her legs, her feet up underneath his torso in the back of this pickup truck and starts bashing him into the hood, the roof, rather, of his truck. So much so that he is like losing consciousness. And she then stops and puts him on the side and says, "Okay, baby, I got to get back now. You got to drop me off. And listen, you got to look for me because a lot of these other girls, they don't like this rough stuff." He drives her back, drops her off, goes home, collects himself because he can't believe how fucked up he got by this person he thought he was going to kill, goes back out, picks up another sex worker, kills her.
Wow.
That's crazy.
He
right?
does, yeah, he gives me Heuermann vibes a lot.
So how about the woman who got away? Who left the date that I had on my show?
Yeah.
I keep wanting to have her back on, but like ABC or somebody went up to me and like cut her a deal or something. So like I can't get her now. But she's on a date with Rex Heuermann as an escort. And enough with the blaming her for going on the date. Will you please? Do you know how many people are have to make this choice for one reason or another? Can you not judge that? Can you just let people be? Okay. And instead of you finding your own sense of superiority through putting them down, just try to understand and just focus on your own behavior. Anyway, so she's a sex worker. She's got kids all over the place. She can't get a job because she's got a record. This was the only way she could, in her estimation, make ends meet. Judge it as you wish, but I wish you wouldn't. So it's actually a good line. She's sitting across from this guy. And he's giving her daddy vibes, right? I want to take care of you. I want to do this. I want to do that. And he is very insistent that she come back to his house, which was very unusual because Johns don't usually want you to go back to their house where their family usually is, or they just don't want you to know where they live or whatever it is, you know? And so she was like, well, that's kind of weird. And he was saying, and I'll drive you there. You can leave your car. She starts to get weird vibes, which, smart, which she is, people who have this experience repeatedly start to get some radar for things, right? And by the way, the guy's a giant, okay? Yeah. He's 6'8", 300 something. So she calls a friend. She had never done this before on a date. Calls a friend and says, or texts him or something, says, you need to come get me. I got to get out of here. And they come and show up. And he gets very angry with her when she says she's going to leave. And the anger took on a flavor that she had never seen before, she says, which was he had this kind of, this isn't over vibe, where it was like, okay, you think you're going to leave now, but I'll see you again. And she went to the bathroom and then took off outside and left. And she went and told people there was something really wrong with this guy. And then she starts hearing about the Gilgo Beach stuff years later and says, I think I was with the guy who did that because, listen to this one, you guys will love this. What is he talking to her about at dinner? What do you think about the Gilgo Beach killings? Well, man. They're just whores. Don't you think they, kind of asked for it by being whores? And she was like, that's weird, seeing how you're on a date with one right now. He was fascinated by who had done it and how these women kind of just asked for it by what they did with their lives. And there are two things that are interesting to me about that. One, don't be that guy and judge people on the basis of the choices that they have to make in their life, especially when, you're there enabling it. And she felt that that was just obviously so perverse that this kept talking to her about a guy who was killing sex workers. And then he started asking.
Weren't there there was a lot of online searches that he had done about,
not to play with the presumption, but, this guy got trouble 6 ways from Sunday.
Yeah, no, that's true. He's got
the wife, though, is the interesting part of that story. She can't have known nothing, not just for two reasons. Forget about my wife. The women in my life who are my friends, like Sarah, have like ESP, and she'll call me and be like, hey, were you flirting in the grocery store today? It's like, women know, okay? If relationship with you, they know. If they're friends with you, they know. Women have a
intuition
of, how men are dogs or whatever you want to call it. And they know. So the wife has to know that there's something going on. And there is a lot of anecdotal, I believe, proof in the form of testimony that could be adduced at trial that they had a freaky deaky lifestyle. So she was arguably aware of his sexual deviancy and freaky deaky lifestyle. So the idea that this is not the man I married, he was never capable, he never did. I don't think that's true. I think that that's an article of convenience for her, which I think people will allow because you don't want to slippery slope this situation for her either. And the police have been very hands off in any implication that she was involved in criminality.
But also she could have known that her husband's a freak and doing things with sex workers. I mean, who knows? I mean, maybe a woman's okay with that, but like, I don't know that she knows necessarily that he was killing these women and then dumping their bodies.
No, but it's not that you knew nothing.
Yeah, I
This
can
is
understand
not
that.
God. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? You know, it's like if I go out and
Especially if you're not having sex with your husband, he's having it somewhere else.
well, look, and maybe they weren't. I don't know what the deal was, frankly. But
I want to know. Yeah,
it's
kind of gross.
Or she's the more interesting. There are two interesting aspects of that case to me. One is her, and two, and not that I think that she's implicated in it, and I'm not just saying that to protect myself. I don't think she was implicated in it. But the second thing is there have to be more.
And we're going to take a break. Our conversation with Chris Cuomo will continue next time on The Presumption.
And in the meantime, if you want to check out more episodes of The Presumption, please subscribe to our podcast. We're available on all the podcast platforms. And hey, you can even watch the interviews as well. We're on YouTube, youtube.com/@thepresumption. And the handle @thepresumption is also for Twitter and Instagram and all that good stuff. So great job, Sara and Jim. I'm looking forward to hearing the second part of this conversation. But until then,
we rest.
We rest.